hopefully we can give you some insight looking back pre-COVID. Leading into 2020, the overall U.S. commercial real estate transactions were actually up 10% in the first 8 weeks of 2020 compared to the same time in 2019. And actually 2019 was also a strong year. We at Rock experienced the same thing, as we had our best first 2 months ever in 2020. We were very much looking forward to the 2020 year when everything changed here in March 19th. Locally, in general, all the activity had been strong. The prices were either maintaining, rising in some areas, and most of the vacancy rates were low. I'm going to go through that here bit by bit between each of the classifications. The office market locally was keeping pace with the past 5 to 6 years with minimal change in rates and vacancies. Retail, the development continued of smaller freestanding retail units or smaller, 3 to 4 unit type retail centers. QSRs, or for us old people, for me, the fast food restaurants were continuing to expand their geographical footprint. Some were actually redesigning their models and needing to relocate because of the redesigning of the models. An example was Panera Bread was going from a larger 6,500 square foot unit. Their newer units are 4,000 square feet with drive-through, perfect for now a pandemic. I probably wish they would have started that years ahead. Another one was an opposite one where Domino's delivery. Now, if you see on Mount Rose Avenue, they have a dine-in option. So again, something that they're trying and looking at a little bit differently. But I want to focus a little bit on big box retail users, which were already declining pre-COVID due to e-commerce sales. The first you can see here in 1998, about 12 years ago, retail sales were at 2.6 trillion. E-commerce, there's a little line down here in the bottom, which was at 5 billion. E-commerce only represented 0.2% back in 1998, 12 years ago. Fast forward to 2015, retail sales jumped pretty dramatically to 4.7 trillion a year, and e-commerce was on its rise to 340 billion, or 7.2% of the overall retail sales. And then to last year, again, retail sales were continuing to rise to 5.47 trillion. And e-commerce started taking off dramatically in the past few years. And now in 2019, 10.73% or 587 billion of the retail trade was through e-commerce. Now looking forward into a 2020 estimate, retail sales are looking to be down. They're estimating that retail sales will be about 4.89 trillion. But again, e-commerce continues to grow to 710 billion, or now 14.5% of all retail is actually done online. Now, I'm sure it's no secret as to who leads this e-commerce trade, but you can see down here in the bottom, Amazon accounts for 38.7% of the total e-commerce. That's $275 billion a year that they trade. And the next closest is Walmart at 5.3%, which is about 38 billion. We've also had some companies that didn't fare out too well when you're looking at, especially at the local market. Stores like Bon-Ton, who was based in New York, was closed. Unfortunately, this was also a large contributor to local nonprofits. I'm sure Ann can attest that, Bon-Ton not being around certainly puts a hindrance on just one corporate entity that provided capital to our local community. Also, other major retailers were closing. JCPenney's, Sears, Kmart, Pier 1, which I'm not sure, I think they started the process pre-COVID, but I think they actually closed during COVID. And then Dick's consolidation from 2 locations to 1, and there might be others. But I think you get the point that the decline had started way before the pandemic. On the industrial side, with all this e-commerce, it's interesting to know that the eMarketer.com reported for every 1 billion in national e-commerce sales growth requires an additional 1.25 million square feet in the US. So when you look at a lot of these industrial big box buildings being built in York, you think that, when is it going to end? Well, I will tell you the values have been increasing, the lease rates and the sale prices once these properties are leased and then resold is increasing at such a rapid pace for the first time, and actually in my now going on 34 years in the industry. So why are all these people looking at York? Well, first of all, they're not just looking at York, they're really looking at central Pennsylvania. But we're located within 500 miles of 36% of the US population. And believe it or not, 53% of Canada's population. We're also located very close to 3 of the 4 primary ports, being Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York. Now, most of these users prefer to be along I-81 corridor, but over the years, they found that as they continued to build along the I-81 corridor, they didn't have the workforce to support all the growth, and they started looking at other areas with good proximity to I-83, I-81, and the Turnpike, which obviously York has. Also, York has the infrastructure and available workforce. It's also interesting that, York is really known for manufacturing, so I thought I'd throw some information in about the Pennsylvania employment that's related to manufacturing. The US average is 8%. Pennsylvania, 8.87% of the Pennsylvania employment is tied up in manufacturing, which actually ranks 4th nationally by the number of employees. And when you look at York, we're at 13.84%, just behind Lebanon. And you can see that all the counties surrounding us, primarily here in the central Pennsylvania region, all have the strong industrial manufacturing background, which actually is very helpful in times like now. Other trends pre-COVID. This is one that I don't know if many of you pay attention to. I know I do, because you mentioned a couple of these companies in the past. But over the last 10 plus years, and I'm focusing on 18 different organizations, that something has happened. First is Densify. And these are in no order by timeline. They're random as far as the timing. Some are 10, maybe 12 years old, but some are brand new. Densify merged with Serona. Now Densify Serona. And now they're shifting their manufacturing, which was a recent announcement, out of York to North Carolina. Falscraft sold cable TV to Comcast, which is based out of Philadelphia. Their pottery division to Lifetime Brands, which is out of New York. And their primary source of income was the radio stations to Cumulus, and that's based out of Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. The Wolf organization sold a little while back to 10X Capital Management. 10X Capital is based out of New York. McLaren Plastic merged with Amtech Corporation in Yakima, Washington, who is owned by Blackford Capital out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, this is going back a long time. This started in 20 years ago, I guess. That's about when we built the Commerce Center. Miller and Company changed to Beard Miller. Then they merged with Parente to create Parente Beard. Then they were acquired by Baker Tilly, who's out of Chicago. And then after that, they actually acquired SF and Company. Now we know SF and Company location on St. Charles Way was closed shortly thereafter. Baker Tilly just made a change at the end of last year and downsized their York operation, their satellite operation, and moved a lot of people into Lancaster. Interesting thing, they had all their space built out, ready to move in right when the pandemic hit. The pandemic hit, and they couldn't move in because they couldn't get their space inspected, even though it was vacant, but the inspection companies were shut down. So that's one little glitch we had in the real estate market. There was many others during this time, which I'm sure most of you have had other stories that you can attest to. The next, Memorial Hospital was acquired by CHS out of Tennessee. who was bought by Pinnacle out of Harrisburg, who then immediately merged with UPMC out of Pittsburgh. Susquehanna Bank purchased BB&T, who then merged with SunTrust to create Truist, who's located out of North Carolina. Some of the effects there, the mortgage underwriting of BB&T actually vacated about 14,000 square feet at 3501 Concord Road, which is out in the East End, visible to Route 30, previously known as Lincoln General Insurance. Fortunately, even though that space became vacant, it's actually being built out right now for a local field FBI office to move from Harrisburg down to York. We suspect that those improvements will be completed by the end of this year. A more recent transaction, Penn Waste sold to Waste Connections out of Ontario, Canada. Utz merged with Collier Creek Holdings out of New York and will soon be publicly traded. American Hydro sold to Wärtsilä Seals and Bearings out of Finland. The Gladfelder Insurance Group, which was an ESOP, sold to AIG, who's based out of New York. Strine Printing sold to Menasha, who's based out of Wisconsin. R.H. Shepard sold to Nor Bremse, based out of Munich, Germany. York International, about 8-9 years ago, was sold to JCI in Glendale, Wisconsin. Hanover Shoes, this might have been more than 10 to 12 years, but Hanover Shoes sold to Clark's North America region. The North America region's run out of the Massachusetts office. Recently, Gladfelder Paper sold off Spring Grove Mill to Pixel, which is owned by Lindsay Goldberg, a New York-based private equity firm. York Container partnered with Atlantic Packaging Products out of Ontario, Canada. And last, York Wall Coverings purchased by High Capital Partners out of New York. I know I took a long time to go through that, but I think it's important to look at these locations on the screen and all the names that were up there. These large corporations have a huge effect on our local economy in a lot of different ways. And adding to that, we've heard recent announcements, obviously, with Gladfelder Paper beginning to relocate their corporate offices from 96 South George Street over the next 18 plus months to Charlotte, North Carolina. And Dentsply just recently announced that it's moving the manufacturing part that's located on West College Avenue here in the near future to Charlotte, North Carolina. The impact on York, I mean, obviously increased vacancies could lead to lower real estate values if not absorbed, lower median income with fewer higher paying employment opportunities. The local income tax will be reduced, obviously fewer higher paying job opportunities. Nonprofits are greatly affected by fewer corporate donations, again, as I think Hen can attest to. Also speaking to fellow associates, also attorneys and accountants who've represented a lot of these clients for many, many years, actually helped with some of these transactions, actually no longer have a client. I know a lot of the transactions we've completed over the years, new corporate real estate firms in Texas and New York, you name it, are coming in and actually handling the transactions going forward. So it does have a big effect on the community. So what about, now all that great news, what about the real estate market during COVID? Now this red phase started March 19th, lasted for 9 weeks. Even though federally real estate was deemed essential business from the very beginning, Pennsylvania real estate was deemed non-essential, and residential practically shut down in the beginning for probably 6+ weeks of that. Commercial sales continued. Commercial sales typically have a pipeline of 3 to 12 months, development opportunities even up to 24 months. So we're handling a lot of the transactions that were already in place pre-COVID. Commercial leasing seemed to focus really more on the existing leases that were in place and working out abatements or deferrals, mainly on the retail side. When you look at the April rents received by a survey that Newmark Knight did, I think in June, they stated that 46.2% of the national retailers had difficulty or did not pay April rent. And in some cases, in some of the properties we manage and some of the big national, they didn't even communicate with you for 6 to 8 weeks because they're looking at across the country trying to figure everything out. And you could call for an update to see where they're going to do, if they're going to pay rent, and they just wouldn't pay or communicate. So, but fortunately, there's some lenders, well, many lenders showed leniency towards owners of retail facilities. The CARES Act was instrumental in saving many small to mid-sized companies. By the SBA reported by June 30th, there were 458 loans, PPP loans, that were provided at a total of just over 512 billion at that time. Fortunately, Pennsylvania ranked number 6. And the PA firms received about 20.5 million, or about 4% of the total PPP loan money. Retail was definitely impacted the most. The store closures in 2020 are now leading into 13,700 store closures nationally. And although I mentioned all the major retailers that closed in 2019 locally, so this started in 2019. In 2020, it was an additional 47% increase since 2019 in store closures. Some of the hardest hit were national apparel industry, especially more of the fine clothing, because events were canceled. Everyone's working remotely. And again, most people, I know you're lying if you didn't say you were wearing your pajamas on your Zoom meeting, but a lot of us were dressed very casually during the red pandemic, or the red phase. Travel, hospitality, I mean, airlines, hotels were shut down. Restaurants initially were shut down. Entertainment, and some of the entertainment still shut down. Huge effect across the country. Obviously, the essential retail, the grocery, convenience drugstores had sharp increases. I heard a comment the other day that grocery stores in the beginning were looking at this, that every week was Thanksgiving. So it was their prime time week after week. Unfortunately, that was not the case for most people. Yellow phase, I can pretty much skip because it was really only 3 weeks long, weeks 10 through 12. And again, Pennsylvania was still the only state deemed non-essential until May 19th, which was just a few days before the green phase. In the green phase, it started week 13. We're now week 23 and counting. Going into the green phase initially seemed promising. You think green, hey, we're getting back. I think we're still in the yellow phase, and in some instances, some institutions are still in, I think, a red phase. But we talked about the retail in the beginning, and you can see in 2016, 2017, how much space was being absorbed: 200,000 square feet in 16, about 100,000 square feet in 17. And you can see in 2018, it started its shift, where there was not a lot of new absorption of space. And then you look at 2019, and here in New York County, we had about 225,000 net square feet absorbed, which when that happens, obviously your vacancy rate increases, and that's continuing in the trend today. The vacancy in the Q1 of 99 was 5.5%. Q2 of 2020 jumped up to 7.97% vacancy, which is the largest change in vacancy between office, industrial, and retail. Shopping center vacancy is actually 11.22%, but the total vacant square footage is 1.6 million, and the total retail square footage in the market total is 28.86 million square feet, which sort of hovers between the smaller market, the office, and the industrial market when you look at square footage. Owners are already having issues. Mall owners, one example is CBL. Filed bankruptcy. CBL owns a Galleria Mall. They also own quite a few malls and major shopping centers across the country, obviously being affected dramatically pre-COVID, and now even more so during COVID, as a lot of the retailers who are occupying the space may not even be paying rent yet. I would say that, again, since April, A lot of changes have been made with retail tenants on some deferral type or modified lease terms. I think 90% of them are now into new lease terms, but that also includes some additional free rent for a period of time to get them through this next holiday season, and hoping that the holiday is financially beneficial. Next, we'll talk about the office market. The office market has been very tight over the last 5 years. It's only varied about just under 0.6%. You can see 1999 vacancy rate was at 5.8%. Q2 of 2020, it actually dropped to 5.66%. There's 760,000 square feet of vacant office space, and the total square footage is 13.17 million square feet, which is the smallest market out of all of them. The rates are still holding steady for now, and vacancy, again, still is remaining flat since 2016. When we looked at our database, we know that there's at least 400,000 square feet of office space that's ready to, or leases that are ready to expire in the next 12 months. That represents 30%. The lease, also we're seeing lease terms shortening, which typically were 5, 7, or 10 years. Most of them now are 2 to 3 years, and that becomes problematic because there's a lot of tenant improvements typically required for office build outs. And office workers, believe it or not, are more concerned with open office environments and less shared spaces. If you look nationally or globally, WeWorks has that open office environment for shared spaces, and they're hurting dramatically. We'll finish with the industrial market. The industrial market, as you can see, 2017, 2018 had 1.5 or 1.25 million square feet absorbed in 17, 2.25 million square feet absorbed in 18. You can see a slight negative absorption in 2019, but I can say that's due to a lot of projects that were built here in end of 18 into 19, some of which are still vacant. But all in all, the current vacancy rate is 4.13%, up from 3.3. But again, I think that's a lot of the speculative big box development. The total industrial square footage in our market's 80.6 million square feet. There's also other projects that were approved by local municipalities in the county, 15 year to date. And these are not all industrial. These are also some commercial, some church expansions, things like that. But the good sign is 11 were approved after April 1st. Hopefully that those construction projects continue to take off and they're not stalled. Residential, I will skip over for the sake of time, but if you need any information on that, Shauna Tarosa at RAAC has a phenomenal presentation on that. So where are we post-COVID? Well, I guess the first question is, when will it end? The longer it ends, or the longer it takes to get past this, is going to have a greater and greater effect on every organization. How long will the government benefits continue to extend? When will the unemployed actually want to go back to work, and in some cases for less? They're estimating that the gross domestic product will not fully recover until latter part of 2021. In some cases, hotel and travel is probably not going to fully recover until 2022, 2023. One, over health concerns, but also changes in corporate travel policies. Larger corporations looking to spend less money because of the weaker GDP. The higher unemployment will constrain corporate travel well into 2022. So we see the hospitality side being affected far beyond 2021. Some restaurants are not going to survive. We're seeing more closures of restaurants and restaurants coming on the market, especially those folk that were relying more on alcohol sales. National retailers will not survive without a strategy to improve their user experience and drive better relationships with their audience. So a lot of them are revamping how they deliver their message and their product. Shopping centers with grocery, pharmacy, QSRs, the quick service restaurants, and other essential services like urgent care will still remain a strong investment. Values in shopping centers and malls without a majority of essential services will certainly decrease in value. And I think funding will actually become difficult to obtain as well, as banks are being a little bit more cautious with some of their clients, and rightfully so. More retailers will have to rely on e-commerce. And I looked at, and I'll jump to office market. There's an interesting study that was done by Cushman and Wakefield over the past couple of years as more and more people work remotely. They've done this in quite a few countries, 2.5 million data points. They say working remotely, 75% are still working effectively. However, 50% are struggling to connect with company culture. 54% are struggling with lower levels of energy and well-being, primarily not taking enough breaks. The other interesting thing was 70% of the younger generation have work from home issues. They're smaller apartments or houses that were more open oriented. They didn't have private offices. They have children are in school. Again, it created a lot of issues. They still think the office will remain a critical driver of culture, learning, and personal connections. As we could test earlier this week, broadband issues were also an issue. I think I heard Zoom crashed earlier this week when school started. I think we will see in the office market increased activity as some office users are going to start shifting around with some of their size requirements. But again, when you look at some of the, I think we've accounted for about 50,000+ square feet that we think is going to become vacant over the next 12 months with some of these renewals. But it was only going to change the overall vacancy rate by 0.5%. So again, not too worried. I think values will remain steady on the office side. Industrial will certainly remain strong over the next 3 to 5 years. There's a prediction because of e-commerce by 2025, only 5 years away, that there's going to be a need for 1 billion square feet of additional industrial space in the U.S. It's interesting too. There's going to be, retail inventory shortages were certainly noticeable, and supply chains are now focusing more on resiliency and less over efficiency, meaning they don't care about the return as making sure that they overstock on product. And if Prologis predicted that suppliers begin to overstock by 5% to be prepared for the upcoming holiday, that increase alone would add an additional demand of 500 million to 700 million square feet of industrial space just to absorb that excess product to make sure that we can supply the retailers. Multifamily will continue to be a strong market, maintain values. What's interesting, 83% of the millennials indicate that student debt is holding them back from purchasing the first home. Their average debt's $41,000. I think layoffs and reduced workforce may force some home buyers back into renting. Residential, the COVID has changed the residential buyer preference. 43.5% are now looking for an extra bedroom or office in their design. 13% shifted away from the multifamily to single family detached. And 22% are actually less concerned about commuting. So there's definitely a shift to more rural areas versus urban areas. So overall, York has usually weathered any down cycle with less impact and has rebounded quicker than most US markets. We believe that this will be true during this pandemic. I think retail will be a little bit slower, but retail, there's always new product, new ideas that come out, and eventually those vacancies will absorb or shift and be redeveloped into other opportunities. But more importantly, I go back to this corporate dream from York County. What can we do together to protect our community from erosion of companies moving or being acquired, or having the decisions and net earnings shifting away from York? I mean, support local community resources at all times, if at all possible. We need to do a better job attracting and supporting new companies that will grow to become our new major employers in the future. With that, I want to thank you, and I'll open it up for any questions and answers.